The Battle of Antietam brought us one of the deadliest days in American history, and maybe the worst day of General George McClellan's life. Here's how this Union victory ended with so many Union dead. September 17, 1862 was the deadliest day of the Civil War. The stories that have survived from that day range from horrifically gruesome to profoundly heart-wrenching. Injured soldiers lying on the battlefield, writhing in pain, surrounded by their dead and dying comrades. Meanwhile, other uninjured soldiers were numb with terror, exhaustion, and resignation to their fate. Union soldier Christoph Niederer recalled, "I felt a blow on my right shoulder. I felt mechanically whether I still had my arm, and thank God it was still whole. At the same time, I felt something damp on my face. I wiped it off. It was bloody. Now I first saw that the man next to me, Kessler, lacked the upper part of his head. Since any moment the same could happen to anyone, no one thought much about it."
The art of war is simple enough. Fight it out till the end.
One soldier staggered in the midst of battle not from a wound, but from finding his father lying dead on the ground. Then there was the story of Union Captain Werner von Bischel, whose dog stayed by his side even after he was killed in the battle. 2 days later, his men returned to find the dog lying dead by his master's side. The two were buried together with full military honors. J.D. Hicks found the body of a teenage drummer boy, not even a soldier, writing, "His lips were compressed, his eyes half open, a bright smile played upon his countenance. By his side lay his tenor drum, never to be tapped again." Major General George McClellan was commander of the Union Army at Antietam, but he probably shouldn't have been. He started out smart. He went to West Point when he was only 15 years old because he just couldn't wait. From then on, though, his entire military career was one big delay tactic, or worse. On this particular day, McClellan's bad decision-making began with him convincing himself and his men that 120,000 Confederate troops were bearing down on the tiny Maryland town of Sharpsburg. The reality was more like 45,000 Confederates, so from where or why McClellan conjured up this mighty phantom force is lost to history. He was also oddly reluctant to tell his generals what he was planning, or even worse, to give clear orders in the heat of battle. Maybe it was because he assumed he knew best. Having a massive ego and inflated sense of self-worth will do that to a person. The latter might have been induced by fear or panic, but McClellan wasn't just unqualified. He also actively undermined the authority of the generals he didn't like. It's almost like McClellan was working for the other side. He actually got a hold of General Robert E. Lee's battle plans ahead of time, and he knew what he had in hand, saying, "Here is a paper with which, if I cannot whip Bobby Lee, I will be willing to go home." But knowing Lee's strategy and responding to that knowledge were two different things. The captured papers told McClellan that Lee wasn't headed for Washington, D.C. He was headed west. If McClellan had acted quickly on this information, he might have ended the war, but for some reason he dragged his feet, giving Lee enough time to first realize his plans had been intercepted and second, act quickly in response, the way a good general does. So while McClellan dilly-dallied, Confederate troops retreated and regrouped. Many thousands died at Antietam as a result. As for McClellan, whether his inaction was design or incompetence is hard to know over a century and a half later. It's no wonder that he survived the war, but he didn't come out of it looking like a hero.
General McClellan has been outthought and outfought.
After a series of costly and frankly mystifying battlefield decisions, President Lincoln removed McClellan from Army command in November 1862. Sunken Road was an unremarkable little farm lane near Sharpsburg until the Battle of Antietam turned it into a hellscape. As the battle commenced, Confederate Colonel John Brown Gordon, who commanded 2,200 troops, assured Lee, "These men are going to stay here, General, till the sun goes down or victory is won." Gordon's math, judgment, or both let him down. Almost 10,000 Union soldiers focused their efforts on taking Sunken Road. Even when another Confederate general sent in 3,800 additional troops to shore up Gordon's forces, it was a lost cause. By midday, the Confederates, those who still could, had retreated. But even though Union forces technically won and took the position, there were terrible casualties on both sides. An estimated 5,500 soldiers were killed or wounded at Sunken Road alone, which quickly came to be known as Bloody Lane. Even presumably battle-hardened witnesses were shocked by the carnage. Charles A. Hale of the 5th New Hampshire Infantry wrote, "What a bloody place was that Sunken Road. The fences were down on both sides, and the dead and wounded men were literally piled there in heaps." Today, Clara Barton is remembered as a pioneering educator and nurse who saved lives on Civil War battlefields, identified the unknown dead, and established the American Red Cross. But Antietam was her first time in active combat. She'd been a nurse for a little more than a year and arrived at Antietam just before the battle began. Over the next 36 hours, she delivered supplies, helped the wounded, prepared much-needed meals, and made sure doctors had adequate lighting as night fell.
She starts working on wounded soldiers with no experience whatsoever.
She brought bandages and other supplies to surgeons, who in some accounts had resorted to using corn husks. And through it all, she treated the wounded while bullets flew around her. Barton was tending to a wounded man when she felt something pass through her sleeve, recalling, "A ball had passed between my body and the right arm which supported him, cutting through his chest from shoulder to shoulder. There was no more to be done for him, and I left him to his rest. I've never mended that hole in my sleeve. I wonder if a soldier ever does mend a bullet hole in his coat." Barton was a soldier, even though she didn't carry a gun. Writing about Barton after the battle, Surgeon James Dunn said, "In my feeble estimation, General McClellan, with all his laurels, sinks into insignificance beside the true heroine of the age, the angel of the battlefield." The Union Ambulance Corps, headed by Dr. Jonathan Letterman, saved thousands of lives at Antietam. By 1862, Letterman was the Army's medical director, but battlefield medicine was grim at best. Early in the war, the wounded were often left stranded where they fell in unbearable pain. Letterman put together an ambulance corps. His men carried the fallen off the field and loaded them onto wagons. Corps members were trained to assess the nature of battlefield injuries and determine each soldier's prognosis. The wounded would be taken through a three-stage system that began with a field dressing station. They would then be moved to a nearby field hospital, often a makeshift setup in a local building, and if they survived all that, to a long-term hospital. Letterman's ambulance corps, as well as his methods of delivering medical supplies, made a demonstrable difference at Antietam and beyond. Unlike earlier battles at which the wounded lingered in pain on the field for days, all of the still living casualties at Antietam, some 17,000 in total, were recovered within 24 hours and sent for treatment. Civilians living in and around Sharpsburg in the fall of 1862 were also hit hard by the Battle of Antietam. As troops amassed around the town, non-combatants faced a difficult choice: shelter in place or run. The town was officially under Confederate control and was likely to be hit by Union guns, but leaving meant abandoning everything one had at the mercy of the armies and their hungry, desperate soldiers. Horses were a particular target. Both armies seized them. It didn't matter if the animals were vital to someone's livelihood. The Roulette family stayed on their farm, but Union forces used it as a field hospital, seizing their textiles, beds, kitchenware, and more for the cause. An estimated 700 soldiers were buried on the property. The Roulettes had no say in the matter. Others were forced to leave. The Pryes, another local farming family, lived in a nice brick home that McClellan appropriated for himself and his staff. The surrounding property became a campground for the Second Corps, who helped themselves to the family's food supply, stole hay, killed the animals that would have eaten it, and even tore out fences to build campfires. Family patriarch Philip Pry filed claims against the government, but it wasn't enough. Financially devastated, the family moved to Tennessee in 1873. Some say that the worst fighting at Antietam happened at Miller's Cornfield. This stretch of 24 acres saw a combined 25,000 Union and Confederate troops battle for almost 3 hours. Union General Joseph Hooker recalled, "It was never my fortune to witness a more bloody, dismal battlefield. The skirmish produced an estimated 8,000 casualties."
We've had the devil's own day, haven't we?
Miller's Cornfield belonged to David R. Miller, his wife Margaret, and their children. When it became apparent that a major battle was about to happen, they left their home north of town and traveled into Sharpsburg for safety. They returned to a scene of carnage. Their home and barn were intact, but the corn crop was ruined. Wounded soldiers were still lingering in the field, and practically all of their food stores had been seized by the Union Army. The dead were buried near where they fell, turning the Miller fields into a massive graveyard. Though some bodies were exhumed and reburied elsewhere, that process took years, and not all of the estimated 5,000 graves were identified. In fact, as late as 2008, a hiker stumbled across a long-forgotten grave. The unnamed soldier was identified as a member of a New York company and reburied in Saratoga National Cemetery. All told, over 500 cannons and large guns were deployed during the Battle of Antietam, producing tremendous, nearly constant noise that survivors described as savage continual thunder. Dedicated artillery units of 8 soldiers each moved relatively quickly around the battlefield, maneuvering wheeled weapons pulled by horses. Soldiers moving across the largely unobstructed land of Antietam were faced with deadly barrages from these units, which could mass cannons together in groups of up to 24 large guns. There were 2 types of cannons in use that day. Although they were less accurate, some smoothbore cannons could fire 12 pounds of ammunition over 1,600 yards. Rifled cannons, cannons with grooves running down the tubes, would spin a cannonball like a massive death-dealing football. Rifled cannons were far more accurate. About 60% of Union artillery was rifled, compared to an estimated 40% for Confederate forces. As for ammunition, solid cast-iron shot was more accurate than shells and certainly proved devastating. But shells, cases, and canister-style ammunition produced more noise, and therefore more terror. This sort of ammunition flung deadly shrapnel at approaching forces. Infection as a result of shrapnel wounds was far less treatable at the time, and in the long term could be just as deadly as a perfectly aimed bullet. Burnside Bridge, or Rohrbox Bridge as it was called at the beginning of the day, spanned Antietam Creek and was crucial when it came to the movement of troops and equipment from the south. Early in the Battle of Antietam, Confederate troops defended the position, but after more than 3 hours of relentless Union assault, they were nearly surrounded. Union Brigadier General Isaac P. Rodman's 9th Corps had crossed the creek a little south of the bridge by midday, forcing Confederate General Robert Toombs to order a retreat. The process in which Union Major General Ambrose Burnside and his troops finally took the bridge was rather uncoordinated, although it was good enough for the bridge to be renamed Burnside Bridge afterward. Some historians believe if Rodman and his soldiers had crossed Antietam Creek earlier, the Union victory would have been far more decisive and perhaps far less bloody. The argument goes that if McClellan, yeah, that guy again, or another of his officers had better directed troops and identified a better spot to ford the creek, Rodman's division wouldn't have wasted time finding a better place to cross. Sure, blame it on McClellan. Seems like a safe bet. But it's also possible that Rodman's guys misread the coordinates and sent their men to the wrong spot. We're piecing the truth together from post-war memoirs, which are inherently fallible, and in some cases deliberately biased. Without a time machine, we'll never know. But in the meantime, blame McClellan. Everybody else does. All wars are remembered for being violent and for being bloody, but just looking at the numbers, nothing in American history compares to the Civil War. And this isn't to diminish any other war, the statistics just speak for themselves. According to American Battlefield Trust, Civil War casualties numbered somewhere around 620,000, about 2% of the American population at the time. That's more than American casualties in both world wars combined, and more than every other war combined until Vietnam. And that's not counting the missing, captured, or wounded. Taken all together, the casualty number is closer to 1.5 million. Not to mention that other sources believe the death toll to be closer to 850,000, in which case no other war or combined count is even close. And battles like Antietam are a big part of why the count is so high. Constituting America reports over 12,000 dead, wounded, or missing on the Union side and over 10,000 for the Confederacy. But even with 23,000 casualties, it's still pretty far from the bloodiest battle of the whole war. A handful are within 10,000 casualties more, while Gettysburg has over double the casualties at 51,000. But Antietam has its own terrible title as the most deadly single-day battle, with 23,000 people dead or wounded in under 24 hours. The soldiers at Antietam had plenty of vivid memories of the battle, hours on end during which they were surrounded by death, and that was true no matter the side. Sebastian Duncan recalled the fear at hearing shots whiz over their heads, the shells bursting into splinters above them, all the men ducking on instinct, even if the shots were passing more than 100 feet over them. Eventually, they realized the distance, but that didn't make anyone brave enough to try and poke their heads up for a better view. But for others, the bullets truly did rain down on them. Thomas Evans wrote how, sometimes, the shells were exploding just over their heads, showering them in shattered bits of metal. Another soldier, Robert Kellogg, had a shell burst so close to him that it blew dirt right into his face. With bullets flying through the air, knowing they were hitting so close, the instinct was just to hope for a little luck and stay out of the way. It's no stretch to call Antietam the bloodiest day in all of American military history, and the devastation on the battlefield itself was obvious to everyone present. But William Child, a surgeon writing from a battlefield hospital near Sharpsburg, believed that maybe it was the days after the battle which might be even worse. In the aftermath of the battle, his work was never ending, dressing wounds quite literally from dawn until dusk for multiple days on end. George Allen added that, in most cases, the wounded were basically piled into the hospitals, tightly packed together where they awaited treatment. But the part that was really bad wasn't necessarily the exhaustion and workload, or even the nature of the work. It was the difference between the dead and the wounded. Many soldiers described the carnage on the battlefield, painting horrifically vivid images of their fallen comrades, but at least the dead were just gone. The wounded had to suffer through intense and burning pain, and it wasn't easy for them or the doctors who treated them. It was all so bad, Child believed it was an act of God, punishment for a great sin. This is one of those things that everyone knows, but deserves to be said regardless. All of the soldiers in this battle were people, not just numbers on a casualty list. All of them had families, and no small number of accounts of the battle come from letters. A lot of them missed their families back home, wanting little more than to see them again. They were hoping for letters and the happiness they got from being able to hear from them at the very least. Many times, those letters would also include individual things to tell different people back home, personal and more intimate responses.
Dear Mother, I hope you are keeping well and not worrying too much about me. You mustn't think that any of us are going to be killed.
And there are stories filled with a lot of longing. William Child wrote to his wife about a dream he had where he was back home, back in his normal life, feeling like the dream was real. Another soldier also wrote home, not sad or despairing over his wounds, but from the fact that someone had stolen something priceless from him, a book containing a lock of his wife's hair. The Civil War saw a pretty important first in history. It was the first war to ever be photographed. Battlefields were generally too chaotic for photography, but photographers could document the preparation and the aftermath, and that's the big part, the aftermath. The Civil War was the first war to be photographed, but Antietam was the first battlefield photographed before the dead were buried. It was the first battlefield that anyone could see, littered with the bodies and the dead and all. Those photographs went up into galleries, and for the first time, people at home could see just how terrible battle was. They could see how bloody and grim it was without ever being there themselves. All of a sudden, the war was brought right to their doorstep. The Battle of Antietam has become infamous for the amount of blood shed in such a small amount of time, but it's also become famous for other reasons, like inadvertently changing the tide of the Civil War. According to Constituting America, Abraham Lincoln had been intending to find a way to end slavery. His solution to that problem was the Emancipation Proclamation, a document which would free slaves in the South as a part of Lincoln's wartime powers, while exempting slaves in the border states in order to keep those states from running into the arms of the Confederacy. But the Union wasn't in a great place at the time when Lincoln first penned it. As history says, Union morale was already low, the military despairing because of lost battles, and the public at large frustrated with how long the war was taking. So Lincoln's cabinet were worried about him delivering such a speech. They counseled him to wait for a military victory, arguing that it would be best to deliver the Emancipation Proclamation from a place of strength. Antietam was exactly that. Casualties were high to the point that many historians would actually call the battle a stalemate, but the Union claimed it as a victory regardless. It was the best chance the Union was going to get, and Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing slaves as of the start of 1863. The Union had a lot to deal with in 1862, a demoralized army, disappointing military defeats, unpopular legislation, and the like. But there was another looming problem: Europe. Europe imported Southern cotton, and there was a chance they might end up recognizing the Confederacy. Backing by a major European power could really change things for the South, and that fear was a legitimate concern as Europe was definitely watching from the sidelines. England and France had initially stated their neutrality, their respective governments not willing to support rebels who believed in slavery, as both countries had already abolished the practice. They were expecting a quick Union victory, but that quick victory didn't happen, and the two European powers started to reconsider. European nobility identified with Southern gentility, and the governments thought that the U.S. was becoming too powerful in world affairs. The nation splitting would reset the balance of power. Most importantly, this war wasn't officially just about slavery. For the European powers, supporting the Confederacy didn't necessarily have to equate to supporting slavery, leaving them room to justify their possible support. Antietam flipped that around, though. It gave the Union a victory, and then it led directly to the Emancipation Proclamation. Suddenly, the war was undeniably about slavery, and the Confederacy was the villain for supporting it. At that point, European powers pulled out entirely since they couldn't support the Confederacy without their people hating them.